This video is just an invitation to reflect. In what we all want there is well-being. And there is nothing wrong with that, but we are aware that beyond what is necessary there is a price to pay so high that there will be no need for words. Each of us is able to understand and draw conclusions about why it happened. I wish you a good vision, hoping that somehow, even your heart opens its eyes. What you're looking at isn't called wealth. It's called pageancy. Extreme luxury from the point of view of wealth per population data represents a deficit, and not wealth. In other words, what you see is evidence of a shortfall. The only way to generate luxury in the world is to take those riches away from somewhere else. If you really want to understand how wealth is distributed in the world, imagine a blanket on a cold night. The blanket is so big that it can cover your whole body. But if you pull the blanket only over your head, the body remains uncovered and the head may suffocate. The flow of resources in the fractional reserves acts in the same way. If you own a car, a house, and a running account, you have not taken anything away from anyone, because if everyone were like you, know that there is not a single human being in the world who does not own a car, a house and a bank account. The moment you can afford 3 cars, 3 houses and an account higher than the real indispensable financial coefficient, then you are taking something away from the world. If you look closely at what happens when you learn how to generate wealth, you'll understand how many have had the chance to have a life. Maybe you're a great entrepreneur, or maybe you have entrepreneurial skills. You've had the perseverance to study and reflect, and you've struggled to achieve your goals. But if you were born in Venezuela, Cuba, North Korea, Mumbai, Nigeria, then would anything change? I say you'd be the same person with the same potential, but you wouldn't stand a chance, and your life would be turned into a lottery, where 1 in a million gets out of it, and the other 999,999, well, they don't. They can't, and you know why? Because if it weren't for those 999,999 people dying of hunger, you wouldn't be there either. I wouldn't be there. If they didn't exist, you would never have seen this cruel and gruesome act of violence. And if logic assists us and you manage to remove the veil of filth and beauty that luxury brings with it, you would see the hunger that it covers and generates, the havoc of human value that these images represent, the pain prefixed with the dollar, the price of deprivation, the glory and victory over misery and poverty, the highest symbol of the head of a snake crushing its victims, a bear devouring and tearing to shreds life and what belongs to it, until even the last shred of civilization is torn apart, because we can't really conceive of a civilization without a dollar. New York, London and Dubai have represented over the last 100 years the punch in the face of poverty, serving $35,000 sweets with spoons of diamonds and gold, $1 million luxury cars, and representing the largest community of private aircraft owners. It has been estimated that Vladimir Putin's fleet of private yachts alone represents the GDP value of 5 Central African countries. The Bush family owns real estate equal to the entire value of Africa. 10% of the Vatican's bank account would be enough to feed every child on earth, and 30% of the Rothschild family's capital would be enough to buy a house for every single human being from tip to tip of the planet. It would be possible to cover the health expenses of all the countries of India and Asia only by monetizing the capital of the Rockefeller family's air fleet. And with only 5% of Sheikh Mohammed Maktoum's bank account, it would be possible to guarantee education and a decent bank account to every man, woman, child and elderly person on planet Earth. Do you think the data on poverty are worrying? It is not these figures that worry me, but those who produced them. The oligarchy broke through the wall of wealth, went beyond extreme luxury, walked through the door of insane wealth, and after doing so did not send a single sandwich to those who simply said, "I'm hungry." It is estimated that as of today, 2023, 5 people on Earth have reached 1,000 billion by making Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg and Bill Gates look like poor beggars. And probably if you work for a salary, this data will seem like a monstrosity to you. But you forget that Apple, Amazon, Microsoft, Saudi Aramco and Alphabet data exceed trillions of dollars. It was enough for me to look at the online balance sheets to understand that only one of these bank accounts contains water for all those who are thirsty. But it has been decided that the greatest glory is accumulation and not helping others. This decision is made every day, every time you leave the house to go to work, every time you spend $1, every time you breathe, and to do so, we take oxygen away from those who now have none. The system is built entirely in every small structure to centralize the flow of money and not to distribute it. It should not even touch us with the idea that poverty is the result of chance. It is intentional. If the government made a law in which everyone must help others and redistribute wealth, we would all be serene from the price of life, but this would inevitably give the same monetary power to everyone. If you are a wealthy person, probably only you know how much you fought to become one. Here that fight is the motor that the system has used to atrophy every will towards those who do not have. But ostentation is one of the greatest shames of humanity. Ostentation is a pig who laughs at the donkey because he works crushed by the load he has to carry. Those who flaunt find pleasure in pointing out that you have more than others. And in the long run, if you look at what happens on social media and in the social life of society, it is a continuous war on those who have more. And if you change perspective, it is a continuous subtraction from those who have less. The system has taught us to be proud of it. A millionaire watching this video might finally ask the question, so should I feel guilty for being rich? That is not the point. Who is responsible for teaching in schools? Top professors, you would say. Why do they have the information that students need? And who should govern? The government, because they have the power and the civic responsibility. And who is supposed to protect us? And who should think of those who have nothing to eat? Who, on the other hand, has? There are two types of parasites that are enemies of equitable distribution: those who steal and those who accumulate. And the term accumulation has been the basis of capitalization since the beginning of time, since the world has existed, and there has been only one way to be able to starve a part of the population or entire nations, and that way is capitalism. A Marxian concept, you would think, if it were just a theoretical key or a political vision. But I wasn't referring to parties taken from right-wing or left-wing leaders, but only to mathematical data, and now I'm going to show some of them. The instability of the capitalist system was called the crisis of abundance. Do you know the concept of the butterfly effect? A butterfly flaps its wings in the west, causing a hurricane in the east. In terms of financial distribution, it means that an extra $1 million in account X is 1 million more victims in Zimbabwe. On a global scale, 94% of the population lived in extreme poverty. By 1910 this percentage had risen to 82%, and by 1950 it had fallen further to 72%. However, the fastest and most consistent reduction occurred between 1981, 44.3%, and in 2015 it returned to 61%, ergo, 61% of the world's population lives in misery. Could we cite 1,000 causes if we were to look for blame, and we would not have an exact answer as to why this happens? The multinationals, the governments, fractional reserves, strong powers. In the end, the only line of leadership that has no interruptions: greed. The widening of the gap between rich and poor, in terms of income and wealth, began according to a study conducted by Cambridge University, 200 years ago. When capitalism was being born, there were only 60 million people living in the world. How you're not in conditions of extreme poverty? The striking thing is that the number of people who reached extreme poverty was directly proportional to the centralization of capital, and we're talking about 50 million people a year, 138,000 every day. Johann Norberg admits in his book that he never thought about how people lived before the Industrial Revolution. When there was a lack of medicines, antibiotics and drinking water, there was never enough to eat, and electricity was inconceivable. In the early 19th century the poverty rate was much higher in the United States, Great Britain and France. Between 40 and 50% of the population lived in conditions that today we would describe as extreme poverty. Areas like Mumbai, Zimbabwe, Abuja in Nigeria and Caracas in Venezuela had many, many more resources than the countries we now consider rich, and I have only listed a few parts of the world that have been literally crushed by extreme poverty, while the United States, Great Britain, and France are rich, beyond the extreme, beyond the conception of necessity. How did the scales tip to this point when there was a time when 70% of Europeans and Americans were officially counted among beggars and vagrants? How did wealth redistribute itself to the other side without leaving even a piece of bread to those who once had plenty of it? How have we halved life expectancy and death rates from countries that we have taken everything away, including food? In the last 140 years, there have been 106 major famines, each costing over 100,000 deaths. The Soviet Union, China, Cambodia, Ethiopia and North Korea exterminated tens of millions of people by forcibly transferring private means of production to public economies and by using famine as a weapon, all financed by private current accounts, that is capitalists. The strength of the engagement, the capacity for logistical management and containment has historically not belonged to governments but to private financiers without whom governments would not even exist. And there would be no bunkers containing tons of pallets on which three funds are deposited. Billions of dollars, and ironically they are deposited in the heart of hunger, poverty, dusty NATO-safe areas. In the book The Strength of Capitalism he compares the fact that in the 1950s about 45 million Chinese died. The 1950s also represent China's most powerful capitalist rise. The more people who were able to capitalize, the more people could not eat, pay medical aid, pay rent, and had made money legally, at least according to the data. Those multinationals still exist and are listed on the stock exchange. I can go on like this for hours. In the course of history, the birth of a capital represents the tail stroke of a dragon that wiped out entire populations. The latest blow to misery has been the post-COVID capitalization, the same COVID that has torn apart thousands of large and small companies by centralizing billionaire flows in the coffers of private individuals in charge of genetic research, pharmaceutical companies and banks and affiliates. It is impressive how you can have something in front of you without seeing it. The next big investment of private individuals and governments will be concentrated on the Third World War, a wave that will hit anyone who does not have the means to stay on their feet. And when the wave of blood recedes, what remains of the financial distribution will create new islands of power, of the new bank accounts, and of the new registers where to catalog deaths, hunger, degradation and the gap between rich and poor. If there's one thing I can learn from history, it's that this closed loop repeats itself endlessly, and no one really wants it to end. On the contrary, they all want to become capitalists. Because that's how the system works, because we've adapted, and in the end we don't see anything other than what we've been shown to see, the world of the box, and we only see what's in the box. But if we stopped to think, even for a second, wondered what's out of the box, what would happen? Outside the scatola there is everything that has been discarded. We have rejected with marked naivety the possibility of opposing it. The possibility of not cutting anyone off from the economic plans, the possibility of saying that a human life is worth more than a bank debt, and finally the choice to return what we have taken away from the people you see in the pictures. Pause. The problem will never be understood until it will be a family member or you personally to experience this situation. What you have will never be enough, and there will never be an end to the ability to subtract. And in the midst of all this contempt for human life you will put yet another like to those who buy the 10th Lamborghini, and the 1000th review to those who created the highest hotel, is when there is no more for anyone. No one will come forward to say I am responsible, because there is not a single person responsible, just as there is not a single solution if we want to take it into consideration from a human point of view. Let's pretend nothing happened. Let's go on like this. Let's pretend that these photos were never taken. Let's make sure to bury even the mere fact of knowing. After all, poverty is far from you. It's far from me. Why should I or you worry about it? What's the point of rebelling when no one else does it? And besides, I already have my problems. To those who have thought in these terms, I ask you to remember that there are millions of children who would give their souls to have the problems that you have, that I have, or at least to have the possibility. You can begin to understand that the true identity of the world is what you carry deep inside, and in the stomach of the knowledge of this planet, there is no wealth. The sense of the new economy, luxury cars and watches set in diamonds, the true face of the world is not a beautiful woman who slips her body on a yacht, not an account made of wealth, but this face, and we are forced to live our lives pretending that this reality does not exist, or hiding it as much as possible. But what is the point of all this?